Hello and welcome back to the next installment of the Weekly Album Spotlight, where I talk about albums and artists that I feel like talking about on this particular week. Today I'm going to be talking about the Mars Volta and their 2005 album, Francis the Mute. This is an interesting artist. And I actually think the Mars Volta are in some ways more interesting than they actually are good. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoy their stuff. I once in a while I put on something by the Mars Volta and I'm like, damn, these guys can play. Most of the time I don't, but I'll get to that later on. So what is this? This is prog rock for the MySpace era. This came out in 2005. It was, from what I can tell, reasonably well received. I know a lot of people who are into this stuff. The critics of the time savaged this stuff, and there's a couple reasons for that. The Mars Volta formed out of the ashes of At the Drive-In, who, from what I understand, were a very popular band with the late 90s indie elitist set. You know, I've talked about this a couple times. You know, we think of Pitchfork as being elitist now. There was a point in time when Pitchfork would give you a terrible review, essentially just for being on a major label. Like that was all it took for them to hate you. So what the Mars Volta were, essentially, is that they were a band. They were the members of a band that the hip set loved, or at least the core members of that band, making music that at this time, in the early 2000s, was still terminally uncool. You know, it's music for nerds and socially maladjusted people, not us, the hip, suave Pitchfork readers who listen to Yo La Tango. You know, I like Yo La Tango. I've like made them the butt of like 4 different jokes in the last year. I have nothing against them as a band whatsoever. I just think it's hilarious that the elitists of the late 90s were like 9 Inch Nails, Tool, Radiohead. Yo La Tango is where it's at. It's just funny for me, even though I really don't like Tool or Radiohead that much, and I definitely I love 9 Inch Nails, but I could totally understand why somebody wouldn't. Anyway, this has been a very tangential kind of night. Francis the Mute, it's Latin-tinged prog, basically. There's elements of Santana sort of sprinkled into the mix, but the main components, I would say, here, the main influences are definitely Roxy-era Zappa and Wetton-era King Crimson, especially the improvs in Wetton-era King Crimson. That's definitely, that's got to be a major component here. But there's also that frantic hardcore energy. For whatever reason, a lot of heavier 2000s music was about how do we integrate the hardcore into XYZ, you know, whether it was metal or whether it was who knows what else, you know, and there's definitely an element of that in here. There are slow songs on here, but a lot of it is played at breakneck pace. There's a ton of changes. The music is extremely intricate. And that's both a strength and a weakness. It's a strength because the album is extremely long. So it's not a boring listen by any stretch of the imagination. There's no point in this album where you're just like, oh man, nothing's happened in 10 minutes. Give me a change, you know. That never happens. The problem is the album is extremely long. So if you're like me and you have attention issues and you struggle with albums that are very long, like to me, when you get over the 50 to 60 minute mark, your album has got to have that X factor. It's got to have that special thing that justifies the length. And to me, all the best double albums do. This doesn't. I don't know whether that's a controversial opinion or not, but it's the way I feel, so we're going to go with it. I love a lot of this album. Like, the opening track, Cygnus, Visimum Cygnus, is phenomenal. The Widow, the third track, Leviaques, I probably butchered that. I'm very sorry. And then Miranda, That Ghost Isn't Holy Anymore. I love, and to be honest with you, in isolation, I love Cassandra Gemini too. However, when I listen to the full album, every single time, about halfway through Cassandra Gemini, I just tap out. I'm like, I need to be listening to something else. I've been listening to these guys play really impressively, tons of changes, the sort of operatic shrieking of Cedric, for like an hour. I need to change this. Turn the album off. Today, put on some Sun Ra. It's happened to me every single time since I first bought the album back in like 2016 or 2017. In fact, I vividly remember, I bought this, I think, the same day I bought like, what was it? It was like, I want to say it was a Death Grips album, but it could have been something else. And I did, either way, I distinctly remember being like, I'm going to listen to this when I get home. And then I did. I listened to it. And then just like today, 2/3 of the way through the album, halfway through Cassandra Gemini, I was like, I'm done. I'm going to listen to the other album I bought today. And I hate it because it's a phenomenal album otherwise. Like I feel like it's a me problem. The one complaint I do have, and this is true of a lot of 2000s music, especially progressive 2000s music, is that there's just so much going on. But yeah, it is prog. It has a concept, allegedly. The concept of the album is supposedly about a former member of the band who I believe was deceased before the album was actually released. I guess he was repoing a car for some reason. He found a diary. The diary was of somebody trying to find their biological parents. There were details in the diary that corresponded with his own life. That's the story that circles around the album. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. There's also a weird story around the Bedlam and Goliath, which makes me question whether either of those stories is true. But, it's interesting. Like I said, it's the Mars Volta are interesting to me because they're sort of the beginning of prog finding its way back in the 2000s, I guess. Obviously there are other bands, you could look at Porcupine Tree in the 90s or Marillion in the 80s, but I think in a way these guys are important because I could tell you they're the first modern prog band I think I heard of. It was the Mars Volta, and then I heard of Mastodon. And I think at the time I assumed I was going to like Mars Volta more because, Mastodon or metal. I'm not a big metal guy. I've never been a big metal guy. I like metal the way a lot of older white people I know like hip-hop. I've got my metal artists I enjoy, but if somebody's like, yo bro, there's this new metal album you got to check out, I'm like, maybe in 2 years. Maybe that's when I'm going to listen to that. So I was like, Mars Volta. I'm gonna check them out. And it blew me away at the time because I wound up liking Mastodon way more. Like I would put on any of Mastodon's 2000s albums before I reached for a Mars Volta album. And And that seems like a weird comparison, but like I said, those are the first two modern bands that did things with prog, and really Mastodon aren't even that prog. They're, you know, as far as 2000s prog metal goes, you know, I think I would bring up like Between the Buried and Me before that, and I would, to tell you the truth, I would reach for Colors and the Great Misdirect before I would reach for anything the Mars Volta have ever done. But yeah, that's that, you know, it's me. You know, I'm the problem here. You know, the album is good. Everything I've ever heard by the Mars Volta is really good, but I guess, you know, it's just me. It's my attention span. It can't be helped. But that being said, this has been a kind of a review, but the album is fantastic, and if you can stomach albums that are very long, this is a treat. I know many people who love the album. In fact, Ben, who used to be on my videos, I remember having a conversation with him about this album, and I basically said to him what I've said to you, you know, which is I tap out 2/3 of the way through, and he's like, man, Cassandra Gemini is the best thing on the album. So, like I said, it's a me problem. This is a good album. I don't regret having bought it. Once in a while, I put it on. I enjoy it tremendously. Like I said, I tend to tap out on the 2/3 mark. Occasionally, I do listen to the whole thing, and when I do, it's phenomenal. And I would highly recommend this, but maybe check out some Mastodon and Between the Buried and Me as well. Anyway, I will see you guys later, and yeah, I should have a new video up for you today. I'm hopefully going to talk about some jazz albums, if I can figure out how to talk about jazz ever, but who knows. It'll probably be a review on like the Flaming Lips or something like that, but until then, I will see you guys later.